Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, Chavra.
Good morning. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim Rambam, Hilchos Paraduma, prakim Ches, Tes, and Yud, starting with Perek Ches. Now, Perek Ches is going to give us many more nuance, many more details in the rule that Melacha is poiseles, as we'll speak out more. We're going to limit that at least a bit. Ein hamelacha poiseles b'mayim. Only if work was done by the Ba'alim or the Shomer, and not in many other cases, as we'll see. And we will also learn another psul of Hesach Hadas. Not Melacha doesn't passel the Mayim because of Hesach Hadas, as we'll see. Independent of that, there's another psul. It's going to be a very nuanced chapter. Perek Shmini has 8 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph, says the Rambam. Mishahaya meimav al kesefai. Right, just to remind everyone that melacha can only invalidate the water, as we said, while you're filling it or while you're transporting it. Once you are mekadesh the mayim, melacha won't passel it anymore. So remember that. So here, obviously, we're speaking about waters that were not yet mekudash. Person is carrying his waters on his shoulders, and and he stopped this act of transportation to give a halachic decision, or he rendered any type of judgment, and not let him. But or if a woman and a man, right, a potentially a shemeres yavam did chalitza, or a girl that was only married as a minor rabbinically, says by the mother or by an older brother, and she has the power to refuse the marriage, which will retroactively undo the marriage. But she has to say that I don't want to be married to him. And he was one of the people in front of whom, when he stopped, she did the act of miyum. If it's not halachic related. But people didn't know how to get from A to B, asking for directions, so he stopped to give directions. Or he killed a snake or a scorpion, or he took food from the market, not to eat it while he's walking, as we'll see in a moment, but to set it aside. In all of these cases, that is called melacha, because he occupied himself with something else prior to him placing the ephod in the mayim, or saying this in other words, prior to doing the act of kiddush. However, in contrast, but if as he's walking, he takes food from the market, not to put it aside, but to eat it, and actually that are in his way, not a problem. Then hadayamaim kshedim. And how? Because we frame both this or that. You can't walk if you're bitten by a snake. The person has no koyach, and they probably need fuel, i.e. food, that's part of their act of transportation. And zahaklal. Kol davar shehu mishum melacha. Then we say, Bein amad, bein loy amad pasal. Davar she'enoi mishum melacha. Here we say, Im loy amad kshedim. Im amad pasal. Wow. Okay. Now, if a person is walking while carrying this water, again, water prior to the kiddush, and he wants to get from point A to B, and while he's walking, he opens up a passageway, even though he attends later to fence, to close this new opening, because the act of opening up, breaking through a wall, that's part of his transportation. That's how he's making a shortcut. Closing it is not part of it. intending to close it is not problematic. But if he actually fixed it prior to him putting the aphid in the water, then it's possible. Because the act of closing that opening, no, that's not part of his transportation. Now, the chain, now there's two versions. We're going to go with the versions of katzatz. If he cut fruit to eat it, and as we mentioned in Halacha Aleph, that if you're eating while you're walking, you're eating because not you're setting aside food, but you need koyach, that's okay. So even though he also has in mind to cut off, to harvest the rest is not necessary. Kavanah to do the rest doesn't invalidate. But the hiksa, but if he actually did it before he put the ephod, puzzle very much chashav ligdoid, not a problem. Im gadar, then he puzzles the water. Halacha beis. Okay, so he's eating while walking, transporting, and some food was left over. And he threw the remaining food under a fig tree, or under muktzah means there were certain nets over which figs were left to dry. Things that were put under it or over it basically are protected. Means he did an act of protecting the remaining food. In this chavan shelo yoydu haperis, if that was his kavanah to save, not to lose it, well, hamayim is psul. That's called malacha. But you know, when you finish eating, you're not going to walk around with the half an apple that you don't want. So you threw it. That act of throwing is not malacha. You simply don't want to. You finished. The im zarkan fisha ein loy tzorach lehem. Then hamayim kshedim. All these nuances will be in this chapter. Next, if a person drew water to sanctify the water for himself, and he gave his water over to someone else to guard it, and while someone else was looking over the water, the owner did melacha. This is very important. This is not a nuance. So yesterday when we began these topics, it's not shad that if I draw water, think about it, right? The way we were learning it. If I draw it for me and for you, mine is invalid because I did melacha. Yeah, that's only if I'm the one responsible to guard my water. And a chanami. But if I draw my water and I gave it over to someone else to safekeep it, now I can do melacha. However, since there's someone else that was charged in being the shomer, as long as he's in that position, any melacha. And in other words, malacha may not be done by the owner. Malacha may not be done by a shomer while he's the shomer. Now, if two people at the same time are doing shmira, and one of them does malacha, amazing, it's still okay. Hamayim kshedim, because there is one guarding it without doing malacha. And it goes back and forth. Even though they didn't verbalize, you watch it. When two people are doing something together, guarding, and one guy begins to do his own stuff, it's self-understood. At the same time. While you're doing kiddush, remember, is putting the ashes in the water, but you're doing it with one hand. At that same time, your other hand is doing melacha. So if it's your water, you're being the kaddish it for you, pasal, because at the same time also will be included in the problem. Was I'm putting ashes into your water, and at the same time I'm talking doing malacha, I'm ksherim. She'ein ze poisel meimav shel chaveiroi, but malacha she'asam. She'ein hamalacha poiselas bakidush ela bamayim. While the act of kiddush is being done, like we said, either the shomer or the baalim. Here I was neither. Halacha dalet. Now we're going to have an application of the above rule. Oh, here we go. Now I'm doing it at the same time. So what did we say? That if I'm being mekadosh, my mayim, if I do malach at that time, I pass it. Okay, I'm being mekadosh yours. That's called malacha. So mine becomes invalid. But if I'm sanctifying waters, neither of the waters belong to me. In other words, pitcher A belongs to the Uven, pitcher B belongs to Shimon, not to me. And I do it together. Now that we established in Halacha Dala that rule, in the end of Halacha Gimel, the rule that that malacha is paisel while you're doing kiddush, only if it's yours, or only if you're the shaymer. Then it's ironically then shneim ksherim because of the cloud. She'en malachte peselas meyachedim. Halacha amamal la'atzmei b'shtei yodav ka'achas. The person is filling two buckets, right? One bucket in the right hand, one bucket at the left hand. You're filling them up at the same time. And then you throw water in both of them at the same time. It's possible. Because while you're being Mekadosh one, they're both yours. You're doing Malacha with the other. Even though the other is also yours. It's amazing. However, B'shnei Kedushim, if you sanctify them one after the other, so here the Rambam writes kosher. Now this is really difficult to understand, even though many stand with this version, because if we're saying Kevan that even doing it together, it passes. All right, let's go. The Kesef Mishnah has the opposite girsa. He says if it's done at the same time, mamish, since they're both for you, it's kosher. But if it's being done not at the same time, that's the way his version is, and it's fossil. And why would that be? So let me say the way he explains. He explains like this: Kiddush Echad means that you intend to gather the waters into one keli after the act of Kiddush. So since they're both yours, and that's the way he explains it. Ka'achas means not only did it at the same time, but you plan to gather the waters. Since you plan to gather the waters into one, so it's one act of Kiddush, it's one mayim. You're not doing malacha with something else. If you leave them separated, that is where we say that if you threw ashes at the same time in two buckets, it's a problem. That's the way he explains it. Now, Kiddush la'atzmoi b'shtei yodav ka'achas. If you put ashes in two of your hands and you threw ashes, Kevan, from both of your hands into one barrel, you would think what's a problem. That's the meaning over here. B'kiddush echad, at the same time kosher. B'shnei kiddushim, it's possible. Because while I was being mekadosh with one hand, I had ashes in another hand. It's called I'm doing work. Milei v'kiddush b'shtei yodav ka'achas. Here, you're not being mekadosh. You're being mamale cave, and that means that one bucket is empty. So one hand is putting the bucket in the water. At the same time, there was another bucket that already is filled with the good water. Your other hand is simply throwing ashes in it. One hand is doing an act of milui, the other hand is doing of kiddush. So if you're doing it for yourself, then they are both invalid. Because when you do two things at the same time, could be that one was done a second before the other. Now, if you fill the bucket before you threw the ashes on the other bucket, if you fill the bucket before you threw the ashes on the other bucket, so that means prior to you sanctifying, you were doing malacha. So the pre-drawn bucket is nishgut. Now, okay. Now, while you were, so if you fill the bucket prior to the sanctification is not good. If it wasn't the other direction, or we don't know which one came first, then you were doing malacha while you were doing the other. So they're both possible. Let me just find my place over here. Milei, whoever's using the chayenu, we're starting a new paragraph. Milei la'achas b'shtei yodav ka'achas. Now, if you're filling 2 buckets with 2 hands, but you're filling both buckets for someone else, again, going back to the first cases we had here. So you're doing, both hands are doing an act of milui, both for another person. So here we say, kiddush echad kasher, shnei kiddushim psulim. So far, there's no difference. Let's go by kiddush echad the way we explained it before, that if you plan to put them all together, then it's considered one act. The moment you plan to keep them in separate buckets, we don't know which bucket was lifted before the other. Could be when you lifted one, then you lifted another, then you're doing malacha.
The lifting is a malacha?
Huh?
The lifting is a malacha?
Even the lifting is a malacha. If you plan to keep these waters separated, so then they're both invalid. Now, kiddush la'achar b'shtei yodav ka'achas. If you're sanctifying for someone else, everything now it began with you, now for someone else at the same time, ben kiddush echad ben shnei kiddushim, they're both going to be kosher. Why they're both going to be kosher? Because we established before that melacha can only be mekad, it can only invalidate while you're doing kiddush for yourself, or if you're the shomer, which is like it's yours, not for someone else's. Now, milei v'kidesh, same thing. One bucket was empty, so my right hand is lifting up the water for you. At the same time, my left hand is putting ashes in the other bucket for you. Ka'achas. So again, lifting up, Kevin, we say that when I do the act of milui, even if it's your water, I can't do malach. Could be, even though I did it at the same time, it could be that I did the act of kiddush prior to doing the milui, or while I was doing the milui. That's doing milui and something else. Kiddush for someone else, Gavaldi, doesn't become invalidated if I'm doing melacha while I'm doing the kiddush. So the bucket of milui is not good. The kiddush is okay. Zahaklal called milui. Sha'asa imay melacha. It's melacha invalidates milui more than it invalidates kiddush. All of these are counterintuitive. I think that's why we learned. That's how we explained that. I'm saying normally you would think that the holier it is, the closer you get for the waters to be usable, the more kavana you have to have, the less hesach hadas, the less malacha. It's the other way around. No, it's milui with malacha, whether it's milui for me, whether it's milui for you, it's always possible. Chol mayim shenismanu kil chasan and va'asa malacha koidim sheyitin eso efer. Here is where we say only if the water is his are they psulim. Hoyu shel acher, they are kishedim. Another rule, kol davar shebi yadai, something that's in your hand, the water is in your hand, meaning even though the water is not yours. And va'asam malacha, bein sheyesham shaymer, bein she'ena oisam malacha, bein she'en sham shaymer pasol. Now, 1 second. The davar, if something is in your hand, while it's in your hand, any malacha you do will invalidate it. The davar she'enoi biyadai, and you did malacha. Okay, 1 second. So I just want to say like this. Here the Rambam is not speaking about malacha. Here the Rambam is not speaking about. Now the Rambam is introducing the concept of hesach hadas. Hesach hadas means that if this is in my hand, I have to be focused on it the whole time. If not, my hesach hadas will invalidate it, not because of malacha. Now I can invalidate your waters with hesach hadas, even though it's not mine. That's the pshat. If something is in my hand, even though there is a shomer that's not doing malacha, and the water is not mine, then there is an issue. It has to be lemishmeres. If it's in my hand, I have to be focused on it. The davar she'enoi biyada, and I do malacha, im yesham shomer. I'm not the owner. I'm not the shomer. the water was already filled up. I don't have to be the one guarding it. It's not in my hand. So then lay puzzle. But im ein sham shaimer, I am. Then there's a psul of hesach hadas. Hesach hadas doesn't mean you have to have two eyes on it the whole time. If it was put in a room and the door was closed, we're good. It's very important.
How come you didn't mention this the entire time?
Well, he's mentioning it right now. I think this chapter is an extension of the previous chapter. So it's a the new dinner. Okay. I don't think it was relevant. We're focusing on malacha. We already established that my malacha won't invalidate your water if I'm not in charge of it after it was filled. 1 second. But if your water is in my hand, then I have to be focused on it. That's the din of hesach hadas. Halacha vav. Wow. Let me just remind everyone again. I just want to connect ches to Zion. I know we learned that yesterday. If you remember, we learned in Zion 2 din of malacha. Now we had more details of malacha for me, malacha, water is mine, water is yours, during milui, after milui, fine. Now we learned another rule in Perek Zion, and that is getting paid for. Getting paid for. So we learned also something very interesting, that here it works logically, at least for me. In the earlier stage, filling up the water, I'm allowed to get paid for. If someone paid me to fill up water for you, not problem. But if I got paid to be mekadesh mayim, or if I got schar to be mazeh the mayim, that invalidates that act of kiddush. Now we're going to put that together with the dinam of malacha right now. It's going to get really fun. Well, it's me and you both already had milui. Then we're telling each other, you put ashes for some reason. You do it for me and I'll do it for you. Now think about it, guys. If I do it for you, that's not payment. Even though I'm doing an act expecting a payment. But when you now reciprocate by paying your agreement, by being mekadesh my mayim, that is called payment. Payment doesn't only have to mean money. And Taka, they went through it. The kitchus elozem, whoever did it first is fine. That's not called payment. That's called doing something expecting a payment. But the one that reacted by reciprocating, that was the payment.
What about the knowledge of doing it? It's a hadas in this case.
No. That's not called hesach hadas. We're doing kiddush. Hesach hadas means I'm doing a malacha that's not connected to the mind. Mekadesh is there's no better focus on it. Problem is I'm doing it as an act of payment. Oy maloi. Now let's go back again. What did we learn in Perek Zayin? That the problem of getting schar is only kiddush and later even by hazor. But getting schar for milui is okay. So I'm gonna get water for you. You're gonna get water for me. I'm not a problem. I don't. No, I take it back. Fear to the other way around. Gavaldik. Umili zelozeh. Only the rishon is possible. The guy that did it first is possible. Why is the guy that did it first possible? And the guy that did it second was payment. Payment is not a problem. So the Rambam explains choyil v'kavanasei. When I draw water with the knowledge that you later will do it for me, that you will have to pay me. So my drawing for you is as if I drew water for me and for you at the same time. And that's called malacha. That's what we learned yesterday. Right? That was the case. If I drew it for me at the same time, shem sulim. But on the other hand, hasheni kosher, because like we said, the issue of schar only begins from kiddush, not from prior, not from milui. Shamilui is schar mutar. That's it. This is the second guy. That's the final. That's the payment. Okay. Now let's go into let's take it further. So in halacha vav was, I'll do kiddush for you and you'll do it for me. The second one is the payment. Then the second case in halacha vav was, I'll fill up for you and you'll fill up for me. There the issue was that if I fill it up for you, since my kavanah is that therefore you'll fill it for me, It's as if I'm filling it for you and for me at the same time. Now let's go different services in exchange. Kaddish li va'amal because I already have the water. I'm telling you, you please be mekadosh mine, and in payment, I'll fill it for you. Now again, whichever one did it first, the other one is the payment. Now, no matter which one happened first, shneim kishedim, because melacha einoi peseles hakidush. The hamili b'schar is mutter. That's it. Right, melacha on someone else's water only passes milui, someone else's water. Beautiful. Now, in the other way, you fill up for me, and I'll be mekadesh for you. Shnei psulim. Shezeh shemilei batchila. Puzzle. Why? Like we mentioned in Allah Chavav, because it's as since he's expecting payment of kiddush, so it's as if while he's doing milui, he's doing kiddush. He did malacha while he did milui. And therefore, he invalidated the milui water because of the malacha. The one who was mekadesh second, he's already repaying the milui of the other. That's called being mekadesh b'schar. Kiddush b'schar. And final halacha ches. Hahoylech lekadesh. Harei ze noitel as amafteach upoiseach lohoitzi ha'efer. That's not called melacha. That's doing what you need to do to get to the waters. Or if the ish or benoitel kardam, you can take the necessary tool. If someone hid the ashes, burying them in the ground, or the noitel sulam, if it was stored in a place to which you need a ladder. In other words, as we began, right, if you're eating while you're walking, that's called soidech of the halacha. Here, the same concept. In order to be mekadesh, you need to get the ashes. So any activity, any work to get the ashes, that's called soidech kiddush. That's not called malach. However, now that you already have the ashes, now you took some of it out and you begin to store the ashes, even only by covering the keli, even only by closing the door, even only by zakav akli ba'aretz. In other words, any type of minimum activity which has to do not with getting the ashes, but with properly storing the remaining ashes. If you did that before you put the ephod on the mayim, pasal mayim, because malacha pasals, the psul of malacha only goes away after you did the kiddush. But you should know, interestingly, the piece of psul is only in the water. That's what we're learning, but not in the ashes. This is a great point that we never made until now. Whenever we say malachas pasals and schar pasals, it pasals the water, not the ashes, which is really great. It's much not minimizing the ma'im chayim, but it's so much harder to get the ashes. If you stand it upright, in other words, after you took the ashes, you continue to hold the cup. Is that called malacha? No. What should you do? Now, why didn't you put it down? Because you knew that if you put it down, you might lose the ashes, but you're not doing anything. You're just staying in the same position. If you were to put it down, that's called a not necessary act. Why are you putting it down? It's crazy. In other words, when you get the ashes from the utensil, and we're going to learn, guys, in the next chapter exactly what you needed to do. From when you took the keli, the only action that you need to be doing are things that are bringing you closer to putting the ashes on the water. So imagine you have the cup of the ashes in your hand, you remove the ashes, don't put it down. Putting it down is called a malach. So of course, holding it is not a problem.
What if you need your hand? What if you need your hand?
You have two hands. Kevin, if a guy only has one hand, then he'll never hold the keli to begin with. Then he'll just put a keli he'll put his fingers in the keli to retrieve the ashes. It's possible. And even if you covered it, like you said, even if you cover it while it's that you don't need to do. Not if you took some ashes, and you saw that what you took in your right hand is too much, more than necessary, and you put it back, that's kosher. That's very important. You can argue putting it back or putting some of it back, that's to save that added superfluous part. That's not called a malacha. Returning some of the ashes to the keli is not called a malacha, thank God. If you put the ashes on the water, and you saw that you put too much, now you removed some of it. Now we're going to learn in the next chapter details that if I put ashes on this water, the ashes that became wet cannot be taken out. But sometimes, everything is calm. You have two shtiklach ashes, one on top of the other. The bottom one touched the water. The one on top didn't get wet yet. Taking it out, now that's called malacha. It's not a problem. Why is it not a problem? Because the moment the ashes hit the water, the act of kiddush is done already. Now you're doing something after the kiddush. Not a problem. In other words, after you put the ephod on the mayim, you can do any malacha you want. If you are trimming a leaf, an olive leaf, in order to properly, let's say, open the container to get the ashes out. Now, if the type of opening that you're making is really not to get it out, but it's more to make a little opening, too much should not go out. So it's not about removing the ashes, it's about not removing too much ashes. Puzzle. But if whatever you're doing is in order to get the ashes from the original place into the cup, then kosher. Wow. Atkan Perek Ches. It's a very nuanced chapter. And now we are going back to a broader topic. It's where are we up to? We explained Milui, Keli, Mayim Chayim, don't do malacha, don't have Hesach Hadas. We got all that. Now we're probably going to go through the act of Kiddush, like the proper way, what needs to be done when you're Mekadesh the Mayim. Then we're going to learn after you were Mekadesh the Mayim, another big cloud, that any other Mayims that got mixed, no matter how little, into the Mayim, Mikudashim, Mechatos, Meinida, invalidates it all. Wow. And then we're going to learn also pratim regarding the ash itself. That ash, if the ashes changed, if their appearance changed, we had something yesterday regarding the appearance of the water changing. It's going to be similar. If the appearance changed by themselves, it's not a problem. Masha Enken, if something else caused the ashes appearance to change, as we'll see, Perek she has 18, has chai halachas, beginning with halacha al. It's a very easy chapter compared to the previous chapter. Right, you have the water that you're going to be using, and it doesn't need to be in the original container that you use to draw the water. Not a problem. Whatever keli you would like to have with the mayim mikudashim in it, put the mayim chayim. So first the water is in the utensil, that's key, and then the nice and aphid, then you put the ashes al pnei hamayim, on top of the water. How much ashes? Very little, only enough that you can look at the water and see the ashes on the top. Meaning, even though you have this huge barrel, you don't have to put a layer of ashes on top of all of it. No, it has to be enough, a drop, but visible to the eye. Step number 2, after the ash is placed on the water, dafka, not ash in the cup and then the water. Not good. Water and ash. Now you have to mix it all up. You give a stir. Now, if you did the reverse order puzzle, now that Rambam is speaking out, Akasha, how can you say that the ashes on the water, doesn't it say in the Torah that you put on the ashes, Mayim Chayim? Clear. The opposite direction. No. Rambam says that's to tell you that there has to be a step number 2. the ash has to be put on the water. After the ash is on the water, when you stir it, what happens when you stir it? Now the water will go on top of the ash. After you put the ashes. Halacha beis. Hamekadesh tzarech sheyischavin v'yitana efer biyodei alamayim. You have to have kavanah. Shenemar v'lokchu latame. In other words, achi yem eschavin lekiddush. And really, the Rambam I know is going a little bit out of the order, but there has to be kavanah when you're doing milui, as there has to be kavanah when you're doing hazoya. Meaning, let's go back to our chapter about kiddush. But if the ash by itself, the wind flew from the keli that had ashes, and it flew into the mayim, even though the mayim was there first, you already took the ashes in your hand, but someone pushed your hand, or the wind. In other words, you would argue at least you began with kavanah. Not good. Or you put the ashes, but it didn't go on the water. It went into the inner upper part of the walls of the utensils, not on the water. Or you threw it and it fell on your other hand, and then it fell off into the water. In other words, it wasn't the kavanah into the water. Now we're going to learn later that there is a minimum amount of water necessary. It's called the water sufficient for sprinkling, which is good. We're going to learn that they would dip the azoid, which is this plant with little buds at the edges. They would dip it into the keli that has the mayim, the consecrated waters, and they would remove it and they would sprinkle it. Now, there comes a point where there's so little water left in the kli. We'll get to that later. It's insufficient. If that's what happened, so you put some ashes in an amount of water that's not insufficient, but then you put ashes in another keli, which also was insufficient. Even though now you mix them together, it's also not valid. Why not? Because you would not mekadosh it b'kavanah. You have to put the ashes in the waters that are valid. If ashes are floating on the water, now we spoke this out in the end of last chapter. Guys, when you put a little pile of ashes, the ones on the bottom are touching the water. It's possible that the water didn't go all the way through all the ashes, and there can be ashes that are floating on the water, but none of that shtickle ash is touching the water because it's sitting on other ashes. That's what we're talking about. And therefore you were allowed to remove it. The kiddush by mayim achedim, that's okay. But it's only okay because the ashes never touch the waters. However, any ash that any part of it touch the waters, then it may not be reused. Even though now they're fully dry. Now, even if the ash went into cup number one, as we learned, without kavanah, and therefore the waters in cup number one is not mekudash. Any part of that ash that is wetted with the waters may not be reused, even if you dry it. So this not being allowed to reuse the ashes, independent whether it was mekadesh or not. Now that it's in a mayim chayim keli, it cannot be reused. Halacha dalet. Clay cotton, clay gadol, and both of them are filled with water, and it's in a way that the waters are all mingling with each other. In other words, it's not a tightly sealed small keli in which the outer waters are not penetrating. No. Now the din is once you put the ashes in the bigger, on top of the big utensil, then it's even if we know that none of the ashes went into the smaller keli, doesn't matter. Just like in the large chavis, we said, you have to put out the most minute amount of ashes, only enough that the naked eye can see there are ashes on top of it. And all of the waters in the barrel are kadosh, even though some of it is in a smaller keli, as long as the waters are intermingling, they're touching each other. Halacha hey. Like the 9th chapter, halacha hey. Here we go with the sponge. So you have a sponge in the big keli. First of all of the waters that are in the sponge are puzzle. Why? Because they're not in the keli when you were mekadosh. Very different, guys. If you were mekadosh and later a sponge, then we're speaking about waters in the sponge. Waters in a small keli are considered to be in the big keli. Waters in the sponge are considered to be in the sponge. Now you got a problem, and now we'll introduce. We said this out in the introduction. The Rambam writes that when you have mayim mikudashim, menida mechatos, even the smallest amount of other waters that fall into it invalidates everything. Now you got yourself a problem. Now that we established water in the sponge is not considered water in the keli, so those waters are puzzle. You know what the problem with the sponge is? When you touch a sponge to remove the sponge, you might be squeezing some of its waters out. So now, Kate said, Yasa, what should you do? You should pour off. Pouring off means don't touch the sponge. And meaning kol shein normally means very little, right? Here, Rabbi Zajac means a lot. Even if there's so much water over here other than the sponge, all of it becomes psulim. Because shamayim shabasfoig, when you touch it, yoitzim, and it mixes with mayim ksherim, and as we'll begin to learn, again, even the most minute amount of water, even if it's mayim chayim, I don't care. In waters that were not mekudash, that fall into mayim mikudashim, invalidate all. Now, if the sponge fell in after the waters were consecrated, now you can take it out with your hands. However, the waters in the sponge are kosher. The waters in the sponge are not kosher. They made exeda. People might not remember to know what was the sponge in there before or afterwards. So they said you can remove it, even though when you remove it, some waters are going out, but only the mayim in the keli are kshedim, the mayim that you squeezed out of the sponge, midrabanan should not be used. Halacha vav. Shtei shekosoi shebe'evan achas. So you have one shtickle stone in which people hewed out 2 stomachs, 2 kalim, 2 receptacles, right? So animals gather and they drink some out of here, some out of there. Well, the point of everything here will be is that when, on one hand, like clay cotton in a clay goggle, everything is okay. Here we say that if both of them were filled with mayim chayim, and now you put aphid only into one of them, even though they are in the same keli, but they're 2 different portions of it. However, if they're connected, so they have to be connected al derech the halachis of a mikvah when you connect the mayim into the meg shamim, and that is an opening that's called in halacha keshifay feres hanoi. Now they used to have wineskin leather pouches, and they would have a typical size of a spout that we say in halacha, its opening is large enough for you to put 2 fingers in and be able to turn your fingers around. That's the shear of keshifay feres hanoi. That's called the connection. Right, that creates hashaka. Or even though that they're 2 different receptacles in this stone larger trough, but if the water was poured all the way to the top of both, and there's a little layer of water that's connecting one to the other, even if it's only on the height of the klipa of a garlic, that's still connected. Now, and you mixed only one, halacha 7. If you have 2 stones and each one of them has like the half a keli, and you put them together, interestingly, you didn't glue it together, but you put it together. So we're going to have concepts sometimes that when you put them together, it's considered one, but not fully. It's not connected. There's no cement. And therefore, the question will be, what about the water that gets stuck in between the cracks? That's what we're going to be focusing on. And you made it into 1 shaykhis, or two arebos. It got split, but it's still connected enough. And you put Aphid on one side. I have to know how to read this. The Rambam is not saying that it's not a keli. We already learned Tilchos Kelim, right? But I think if I'm not mistaken, if it's not koinus mashkin, it's good. Question is, there will be some moisture of the water that gets stuck in between them. Hamayim shed beinehem, not the mayim on the other side. That's good. The water in the chritz, that's what it means. But if you mamish connected it properly, and to the point that if you lift up one half, the other half will come together, then it's considered completely one keli. And even if there is begashmius, a little crack, and water gets into that, that water is considered okay, right? Hamayim, even shei benayim are mikodashim. Halachei. Mayim mikodashim, if you have water that's already sanctified, I mean, many dinim that we learned in the sponge is predicated on now halacha ches. Other waters got mixed in there. Not stam. Even waters that were filled up with kavana for it to be consecrated. In other words, those waters are valid by themselves to have ashes put into them. Doesn't matter. More than that, Zakir Rambam. Wow. If any mashkin, now guys, we know mashkin means water. Doesn't only mean water. Halachically, you have the 7 mashkin. Any one of those 7. Or made peiros, which is not one of the 7. Right? Water, blood, dew, milk, honey, oil, and wine. Those are the 7. I know there's a better seder with a mnemonic, but good. So, or made peiros, the din is, it invalidated it. Not only did it invalidate it, that means you have to pour it all out. And more than that, we already had a little bit of that yesterday. Not only do you have to pour it out, you have to now be menaged, you have to dry out the inner part of that keli. But tzarich lenagav akli, and only then can you put in it mayim mikodashim achayim. Now, if inside this mayim mikodashim falls ink or kaimes or kankantum or any other liquid, that changes the color of the water. Take invalidates the water, but here there's a little bit of a leniency that you have to pour it out, but you don't have to be menaged. And why? Because if there'll be in there any remnant of the previous water with the dye, you'll see it. Hareyunira. Halacha tes. Hamatbil kli. Lachatos. Now, guys, let's take a step back over here. Here, all the kalim, now you could be mekadesh, you could be mamala the mayim in kalim that are not susceptible to tumah. That's fine. You can be mamala the mayim in kalim that are susceptible to tumah. You can even be mamala in kalim, Rabbi Chaim, that became tamei, and as we learned, Bisman by Sheni, they would be metame it, but you have to take it to the mikvah. Not kalim prior to the kiddush, which is normally what they did. They were metame it. They took it to the mikvah. They dafka did not wait until the night, but fine. So, but what did you use? You used a keli that is not the ra'oi to be mekadesh. Tzarich lenagev. The water is very good. So what did we say before? If the smallest amount of water, let's go to a normal mikvah. Or not a mayim. Mecha. If I'm going to be toilet in a mikvah of meg shamim, which is what they did, now that we established that even the most minute amount of water that get mixed in here invalidates it, here we're not speaking about the water getting mixed prior to the kiddush. Here we're speaking about you putting waters in it. You got to dry it out. And only then you kaddish one. If I toivel the keli that was made tummy in a mayon, then I don't have to dry it out. Now, what about the waters that are already mikudashim? We can pour those waters into other kelim. Now the din is because even mei mayon, once you already have mayon mikudashim, any waters, we said before, even if those waters were drawn l'shem to be mekadosh it, we can't mix it in. Gewalt. Halacha Yud. Keruya is a gourd, and in those days, before they had disposables, there were certain vegetables, even though the walls are a little bit porous, right? They're not plastic, but they were used for kalim. So if you have a keruya shepilu b'maimer in lekadesh, again, why would they take it to the mikvah? Because as we said, kedei lo hoitzim libon shel tzedukim, all of the kalim were made tummy, and now you take it to the mikvah. So first of all, what did we say before? If you toivel it in a mikvah, in a mayim chayim, even though you have to take the waters out, you don't have to dry it. If you toivel it and make shamim, you have to dry it. So now let's apply it over here. Here the issue is that if I toivel it and make shamim in what we call today a mikvah, the gourd, this vegetable, absorbs some of the water. So drying it out will be ineffective. So if it's ma'amerim lekadosh that you don't have to dry out, then you can be mekadosh in it. Why? Because hamayim shehutbulu bahem. Because the kalim, all of these kalim were made atomic and then tuliyoim. So some of it nivloim b'toicha. And now that they're sitting in there, some of it will go out. The tmeis v'hit biluam ein mekachin ba shamayim hatemeim hanivloim begufa yetzu v'yisavu amayim shemekachin oisam b'toicha. Halacha Yudal mayim mikudashim. So you have your great waters. And now in your mayim meinida mechata shenafel toichem shkotzim v'ramasim, that certain these little dead rodents fell in there. But here what happened is that their bodies opened up, or because of these things falling in there, the color of the water changed. In both cases, psulim. And even if these creatures died a long time ago, so they're very dried out. For example, in a mullah, a dira, the hakina, shebatfua doesn't make a difference. But one of the two, either the water color changed or their bodies opened up. If beetles fell into the water, here it's even worse. You have to know the nature of a beetle. And the waters did not change, based on the rule that any liquid that got mixed into the mayim mikudashim invalidates it, the waters become puzzle. Because Hashem created beetles in a way that there's some parts in the body that are open. So if you put it into a water, some of it goes into the beetle, some of the water will come out of the beetle, and some of its own juices will go out with it, because they are like Yeshifrei Feres. And there's no bittul here. No matter how little amount of outside water gets mixed in, passes. If you have that animals, domesticated, non-domesticated, drink from, they are puzzle, because guys, when behemoths for chayas drink, they drool. When you drink coffee from a cup, that's the question. Does some water in their mouth go back in there? The only exception is the yoino. The chen kala oifos, because there's some interaction. However, chutz min hayoina, because a yoina knows how to only sip the water in, whatever it's drinking from, and none of it goes into it. It's a very clean animal. So also cleanliness is connected right to holiness, to Tara. Also, shiratzim also don't spit back in. That's klipa. They don't give anything. They ain't a place. Because a chulda licks. Any creature that licks, come on, it licks. So some of it, the moisture on the tongue goes into the water. Comes out always that halecha yoytz mepi alamayim. Halacha Yud Gimel. Mechatos shenishtanu mareim. So there you go. If the color changed, not for any exterior reason, machmas atzman. That's the way Hashem made water. You stand water for X amount of time, but nothing else fell in there, then kshedim. But if they got changed, even from smoke, lamashal psula, even though smoke is not tangible, and that's not called machmas atzman. Now, what happens if the water became frozen? So there's a change, and now it melted kshedim. Even though you caused it to melt by putting it into the sun. But if you melted it through fire, that's already psulim. Why? I don't know. Azayidus. And where did the Rambam get it from? I also don't know. But at least we got the Rambam. How lucky are we? How lucky are we? Efer chatos. So atkan mayim. Now let's go to the ashes. Efer chatos marov. Here, look at this. Not only if it change machmas atzman, it's kosher, but here ashes are more lenient than water. Here, even if they change because of smoke, they're still kosher. Water that changed because of smoke is pasul. Ashes that change, maybe because the only way to get ashes is by burning it. It's like min b'minoi, I don't know. Okay. Now, nishtana machmas avak, but if even dust got mixed into it, oishin is sort of by other ashes, even in the most minute amount, just like if water's falling to the mechatos, it passes it. Other ashes, meimikla means any item that was stam burned, passes it. If you pick up a cup, mechatos, and you picked it up in order to drink it, not a problem yet. But if you drink from it, drinking from it means the moment your lips touch it. Now, why is drinking from it pasul? So, Kevin, like we mentioned in Perek Ches, and we spoke it out, that we introduced in Perek Ches, Hesach Hadas. This has to do with Hesach Hadas. Because when I'm holding the cup and I'm actually drinking, prior to drinking from it, I know it's mechatas. I was not masiach das. The whole sugi of Hesach Hadas is a very difficult sugi to always define it. The moment I drink, it's time for me. That's an act of Hesach Hadas. But if water was poured directly into my throat, amazing. That's Rashi,
but it's lighter.
No, it's not that. Look inside that Rambam. He quotes all this. Take a look over there. That's why I learned this yesterday. This has to do with Hesach Hadas. At least, b'shem whom he doesn't, he writes, he probably quotes someone over here. Okay. Halacha Tazayin. And then you found the keli covered. Look at this, psulam. Why? Shema Adam she'ena toy lachatos naga bahem. Just to know, guys, when there is a cover on a keli and it's no longer covered, don't forget, guys, that animals, while they are alive, are not tummy. The only being is a yid midoiraisa that can be tummy while they're alive. So uncovering could have been done by an animal or by a person. That's a suffix. Covering can only be done by a person. So there's only one suffix. Was he tar? Was he tummy? You say he was tummy. But if you left it covered and now you found it uncovered, again, I don't get this whole Hesach Hadas, but here it's not a problem of Hesach Hadas. Here the problem is, which is a problem. As we mentioned, then it's psula. Now I know that when it was uncovered, maybe a ton of person uncovered and touched, but that's already a svek. First of all, Safik Adam Gila, Safik Mimachai Beremes. Guys, if only a behemoth or chai beremes uncovered, even if they touched it, not drank from it, they're not metamed. Now, even if it wasn't Adam, here again, Shema hayatar lachatos eloi. Allah yudzayin amoisa mayim mekudashim or mayim shenesmal lekiddish. You gave it over to a tummy person to guard it. The moment you gave it over, it's possible. And just in our cloud, if someone is tummy, they will never guard it from tumah. They themselves are tummy. And final halacha yutches shnayim shohayu shoymim esamayim, and one of them became tummy. And we just established that a tummy shoymer is not a good shoymer. But here, when you have two, we also learned this today in Perek Ches. So we say the one that's good, even though they never verbalize shayim. They play shayim b'reshus shayim, and it can go back and forth. Tar v'chazal lishmar, but then v'nitma shayim v'aytik shayim. Automatically, if they are coming at the same time, even for one moment, then the mayim is sulim. And today's third chapter, Perek Yud. Now, this will be a chapter that we're going to learn more details. We're going to learn, going back, that the mamale of the mayim does not need to be the one that's mekadesh. The mamale does not have to be the mazah. The mekadesh doesn't have to be the mazah. First establish that. We're going to learn that when it comes to hazah, now we're going to begin with hazah. It's very interesting. The one that's doing the hazah has to have kavanah. The one upon whom is getting mazid doesn't have to have kavanah. How great is that? And then we're going to learn also some pratim, at least now, of the dipping of the ezov in the water, like we mentioned. Now that you have the mayim mikodashim, there has to be an act of tevilah There has to be enough water that will impart some water when you toivel the azoiv. Sometimes there can be so little water left that the only way you're going to get the azoiv bread is by smearing it. It's like when you clean out the bottom of a keli. It has to be something that you dip it in, and there's enough water that will adhere to the tips of this azoiv. Today, lahazois, we're going to learn some pratim about that, and a lot more. Perek Asiri has 10 halachas, beginning with halacha al. The details is nowhere as nuanced as today's Perek Ches. Today's Perek Ches was oigavaldik. Halacha al. Hamamal mayim lekiddush. First of all, or damaz. It could be one guy was mamala, Reuven was mamala, Shimon was mekadesh, and Levi is maz. Mamala adam mekli. And you could, like we learned so many times indirectly. Here that Rambam writes at the Fedish. You don't have to use the same keli that went into the Mayim Chaim. And umekadosh mekli acher. And more than that, even after you have Mayim Mikodashim, you don't have to use the same keli. And you can be mazer from another keli. Because the peoples can change, the kelim can change. Halacha base. Amala odam mayim umanicham etzlam v'loy kiddush kozman sheyirtza. And by the way, as we made it clear today, and yesterday it wasn't clear by me, now it's clear, that even though malachas poiselas, that's while you're mamali and while you're moilach. But if I'm a malamayim and I put it in a safe place, I can leave it there for 20 years. That's what he's saying. Now, if the waters change color, you have to know those didn't. Machmas atzman, machmas davar acher. You could be mekachlum. And you can be moilach. I mean, while you're being moilach, you can't do malach. While you're being moilach, you can't have hesach hadas. And the noise whenever you want. Next. Once you already have this mayim mikodoshim, you can leave it by you. Not for days, for years. In other words, I had water. Let's say I wanted to have water for me. So that kavanah we learned before. So I have in my house, that's Mashiach will come. Everyone will have in their house their mayim. And if whenever it's needed, they don't have to go anywhere. They have the mayim there. What's your question?
How come when he's traveling from the water until the kiddush, and he wants to grab it from whatever it is, he has to give the water to another shaykh. He could just put it down and he's watching it. He can share it happen. Just like he puts it in his house.
I think, okay, in other words, just to make it clear, now that we established that the malacha that's poisel b'mayim ad hakiddush, right, until after the kiddush. So when a guy is walking, is there a point where halachically you can say, I put it down, now it's not being transported? I think you could. Yeah, there's something there, correct. Some detail. You see, there's no Gemara here. That's a Gemara question. How do you define? Okay. Another thing. Also, you can just have ashes. And you can transport the ashes. Just being it just facilitates this whole procedure. Maybe I'll tell you, maybe having ashes is the easiest thing. You have the ashes. Like if you live in an area where there's no mayim chaim, you got a problem. If I live in a place where there's no mayim, whenever I'll need, like who needs the whole issue of malacha and has chadas and this? When you need it, go over there, draw the water, be mekadosh, make the keli tummy, take it to the mikvah, I mean, whatever you need it to do. Now, guys, there was a story. There are a few gezedas that are banan. If you remember going with those spiked shoes. It was once a terrible story and people were trampled, so they made a takana. There was something that happened that while mechatos was transported in a boat over the Jordan River, it became tummy. Because of one time, it's very difficult. And they made a gezeda, but they only made a gezeda on cases similar to the story and they didn't expand it. So that was the case. And it turned out that while the guys, not the ashes, not the mayim, the mechatos, the mix, and in a way that it was matame everything in the sfina, and those mimes became tummy, and that was viewed to be something such a calamity that they made because of that. Sanhedrin says, you can never transport mechatos, but they went further. Nor only the efer chatos, not over the sea, no, over a nahar, which is similar to the Jordan, in a boat. nor can you have it float on the water. In other words, you can have a wooden keli filled with mechatos and give it a push over the Jordan. You can't do that because while it was in the boat, once it became tummy. You can't even throw it over the river. What is not included? You yourself, while you're holding it, you can go. You can't swim, but if you can walk over the Jordan River, which, by the way, the Jordan River today, many parts of it is like a very shallow waters. They were not included. Even though you can argue if the story happened with Mei Chatos, why did they include Ephod? But they included Ephod. But they did not include not Adam, not Kalim, that are ready for, not even the waters. That, yes, my vida moisem anar b'sfino. Like the Gemara says the words, that the Gezeda was only Kim Maise Shahayu. Shahayu. Allah Chagimah. My vida mayim mikodashim b'sfino b'yam HaGadol. To transport it by Yom HaGadol is okay. Because it's not the Jordan. And Vishatin Bahem, or they can be floated over such waters. It beats me. You try that. You put, we're not talking about a little Yardin. You'll go put a wooden keli and push it over. Yeah, if that happened, you push it in the Pacific and someone found it in Hawaii, it's good. And not on a sea. And the ain't sort of claiming mayim already sheneskachu. So the concept, guys, a little bit more of Shemitah, a little bit more of no hesach hadas. What we're learning now, we spoke this out a few days ago, is only midrabanan. When you walk with stuff, so there's different ways of putting it on your body. You can hold it in your hands, that's in front of you. You can have it on these sticks, and then if it's on a stick, is it in front of you or behind you? The Chachamim midrabanan did not want you to put it behind you. Because it says this man that they have the utmost level of Shemira, only then are they many then, and if not, it's so I know we're quoting a pasuk, it's only an asmachta, it's a psul midrabanan. V'haraya says the Rambam, if you have two barrels, it's a type of stick that you can only put two barrels, one in the front, one in the back. So we're not going to say you can't put it on the back. If you don't have an option of putting it on the front, then you're good. Because it's not possible to carry both at the same time on this type of instrument if one will not be on the back. And guys, clearly, if the pasuk l'mishmeres l'meinida would have been a takadin doiraisa, who cares? Then don't put it in the back. It's only a derabanan. In these cases, they didn't make the Gezeda. Halacha 5. Beichata shesher kolam b'mishkol. Now, we're speaking about, the real moisnayim weights. So you have a stone that weighs a pound. That's in one pan. And you're putting water in the other pan to know how much weight of water do you have. We're speaking about mechatos, not mayim kosher for. No, mechatos themselves. So the problem will only be if you have hesach hadas. However, you'll define that. But the im lav, it's kosher. What's going to happen if you already know the weight of the water? You want to use the mechatos to weigh anything else. That goes against the din of mishmeres. Now, we're not speaking about malacha. This is worse than malacha. This goes against the din of mishmeres. As we began, any part of, any person of, never will the tful yoim koydem ahead of shemesh pasel. Afapi surely ahead of Shimshon Kshedim, as we mentioned, Kol Maisa Para. Even though we began it only speaking about the kohen doing the avoida of the shechita, etc. Here we're going to any part of the para. Vehamili, vehakiddush, vehazoyim, all of it. It's kosher b'tful yoim, k'moy shabiyarnu, and umepnei atzadukim, because of them saying otherwise, we are dafke metame oklei shetem umatpilin oisam. So this concept of what we did to the kohen, that's going to be shechting. They did it all the way until the end. Halacha. Now, let's speak about the sprinkling itself. It says that Rambam hakol kshedim lahazois chutz. You gotta love these. Everyone chutz. You hear hakol, you're expecting exceptions. Chutz meisha, the tumtum and androgynous, because they're not male. Chedesh v'shoyet v'katan, and they cannot because they don't have das. Now we have a very unusual halach, and we already learned together, my friends, that you have the concept by nedarim, right? Mufla samuch leish. Here we're learning another din. Katan sheyesh boidas kosher lahazos. You tell me where else do you have such a halach other than in the nedarim? Now the Rambam doesn't even give an age over here, and I don't know who is determining whether his das is called halachic das, but that's the rule. The ha'adol, male, kosher lahazos, because the adol is not tamei. Katan sheyesh boidas shehizam, and he establishes okay. But now a woman is not okay. She helped him, so we have to define what her help entails. For example, if her help was she holds the water in her hand, but he was the one that dipped the azoiv in it. He was the one that sprinkled. That's not called help. I mean, the cup can be on the table. Hazasik sheda. She should not touch his hand while he's sprinkling. But if she touched his hand, if it was that type of help, then the shas has also in psula. Halacha zayin. Hamazem, the one who's doing the sprinkling, tzarich lechavin ulahazois alatome letaharoi. Aber, and to the point that it's essential. But that's the one doing it, the one upon whom sprinkling is happening. This is beautiful. Right, so all of the tefillahs that we have in slichas on the high holy days, that Hashem, we quote the psukim, that Hashem should throw on us mayim to hoidim, the psukim we have in Nachem, we should become purified. You know what that means? It means that when a person is the one becoming tahor, even without ledatoi. Ah, how beautiful. Yes.
A woman cannot do the sprinkling because of a pasuk or because she could be tamei, or what's the reason?
No, the Rambam doesn't write why. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm assuming because of a pasuk. And Bachlal, the bigger question is Kavan. I mean, we have to get there one day. Amen. Like the Rambam does sometimes quote sources, sometimes doesn't. That's the bigger question. Why? There's rules. I'm sure there are rules. These are already. That's upgrading. Where halavai, we're an aleph. That's already gimel dalad hey. Okay. Now listen, guys. We already established that you have to have kavanah upon whom you're sprinkling. But one second. Let's say you're doing the sprinkling, and you're going to sprinkle. You know you're going to do it on Reuven and on Shimon. Reuven is in front of you. Your intention was, I'm going to sprinkle now on the guy in front of me, and then I'm going to turn around and sprinkle on the guy behind me. But when you sprinkled, how do you sprinkle? Right? You dip the azoiv in the water. You lifted it up. Think about it. It can happen that while you're preparing the movement, the forward movement, like you need the tzorech aliyah, you made a backwards movement. And when you made a backwards movement, it spritz to the guy behind you. Even if you were planning eventually to spritz it on him. That's the case of the Mischav lahaz is the fun of his la'achrav. Or la'achrav is the fun of hazu yosei psula. Because when this hazah has to be for that person. Now, Nischav and Lahaz is the fun of his let's start of Shalpanov. Again, it must be there's Reuven in front of you and Shimon on your side. You are planning to sprinkle on both. You can see both of them. Here we say that if you don't know how to aim and you hit the other one, that's already okay. Again, it must be that there was kavanah for both. Just you were planning on one, but you saw the other. Unlike many other times, right? 7 times they would do hazos hadam hapara keneged kodesh kachim, right? Keneged ha'echel. You got to dip your finger in every time. Then the shadayim is invalid. You got to smear it on the carcass of the animal. Not over here. When you dip the azoiv into the keli with the mayim hamikudashim, so then if you're going to be sprinkling on a few people, you don't have to dip it in for every time. Until when there isn't enough water on the tips of the azoiv to fly off when you do that action of sprinkling. Another thing. If you have a azoiv that has many little sub-branches, and when you dip it into the water, there's like a lot of water in there. And you're like koyach, you're strong, and you have 10 people in front of you, and you give one act, and the water goes on all of them, and it's a mashahu of water on each one. It's also good, as long as you had kavanah. And because if any person who needed this sprinkling only had on him or on the keli a trop, who again, the recipient of the hazor doesn't need kavanah. The kelim can't have kavanah to begin, but the mazeh has to have kavanah. She's having a mazeh lahazis Allah. Now, tavalas eizoi v'nis chaven al davar shemekabel tuman. I know there's different ways of learning this Rambam. I'm just going to follow the way that Rambam La'am explains it. That Rambam is using these words for a reason, meaning something that is tamei. If you sprinkle it on something that's tamei or on a person that's tamei, that's the way we learn. And like on an animal, since you don't have to dip it in every single time again, but if Taval Eso Ezoiv Lahazois on something that's not tamei or an animal, and you also were going to sprinkle it on the Adam, but when you did the dipping, you only had in mind for something that doesn't need Hazoya. Even though now it went on Adam Al Teli, so you don't have to dip it in every time, but the act of dipping has to be for a proper act of Tahara. Now Hazoya Psula. In other words, the tefillah has to be ksheira. That's the point. And when you're doing the act of dipping the ezog into the mayim, bikudoshim v'yischaven lahazis ala adam or ala davar hamakabel tumah halacha tes. Keep pilaso ezog v'nischaven lahazis al davar she'ena makabel tumah. So now we said that the tefillah was psula. So the Rambam has to go into the detail. You know what's puzzled? The tefillah. You have to do another act of tefillah. But the water that's now saturating the tips of the ezoiv, that water is not invalidated. You don't have to take it off the ezoiv. You don't have to dry off the ezoiv. Leave it as it is. Hamayim, even though there are minatfim, they are dripping. Those waters are ksheira. Lefikach im natfu bekli. If those waters drip in a keli. And now you dipped it in that waters themselves. How great is that? But now your tefillah was called a tefillah kasheda because it was to throw it on someone that's tamei or something that's tamei. Now hazayasik sheda akedekach, the water remains good. So there's a tefillah kasheda, a tefillah psula. All of the waters by a tefillah psula remains 100% kosher. And today's final halacha yud. So you begin with the keli. The keli has mechatos. You're dipping in the ezev. Every time you dip in this plant, l'shem, throwing it on someone who needs it, the water in the cup is getting diminished. So what is the minimum amount needed to be left in that cup for you to be able to do another act of tefillah when necessary? Mechatos shenismatu. Toivel bahem afilu rashe gevoilim. Oh, it's if there was so little water that when you put the ezoiv plant back into it, only the outermost tips touch the water. That's still good enough, as long as it's called an act of dipping. Now, if there's so little water left that when you put the ezoiv plant in it, no water would adhere to the tips. But if you bekoyach, you smear it. Then it would. That's not called tefillah. That's already not good. No, it's if you have to do a act of sponge, that's already not good. Now another thing. So loichis shepiyotzad. So you have the mayim mikudashim, the menida, the mechatos in a keli whose opening in the top is very narrow, which means that when you put the stalk of ezoiv in it, it goes to the bottom and it gets the liquid on it. But when you remove it, the walls of the keli remove some of that liquid. So the din is, that's fine, toivel, and you pick it up, kedarkoi, and if there is enough water on the tips that when you make the action of sprinkling, water will fly off it, you're good. In other words, that let me just explain what I'm saying. I dipped it in before. When I dipped it in before, when I removed it time number one, some of those waters, like I said, because of the opening being narrow, stuck to the sides. You have to dip the azoid into the mayim. Not some mayim should stick to it. One might have thought, since there might be mayim now on the top, inside of the top of the opening, now that I dipped it in the second time, it began good. But maybe when I'm removing it, some of the waters that are not in the kelim, they are on the walls of the kelim, will adhere to it. We don't say that. Doesn't bother me. As long as I dipped it into the water, and some of that water is going to be on the tips of the azoid, it's going to be kosher to be used for sprinkling. Give Valdi.
Can one be sprinkled more than once if they feel they didn't get anything on him?
If there's a doubt, you should do it more than once, but there's no necessity. In other words, a drop. I don't think it's about feeling. It's not a feeling thing. Go see. The guy can say, no water got on me, so let's find the water.
Thank you so much. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. 3:30 Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Wow.
Go ahead.
I'm a